What would you do if your own child betrayed you in the most unimaginable way? Today, I'm sharing a story that will shake you to your core about a grandmother who discovered her daughter's darkest secret just in time. This tale of family betrayal, revenge, and an unexpected miracle will leave you speechless. If you love true emotional stories that restore your faith in justice, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let me tell you about the day my world shattered and how my 7-year-old grandson became my guardian angel. I never thought my daughter Rebecca would be capable of such evil, and perhaps that was my greatest mistake as a mother, because I loved her, blindly trusted her completely, and believed every word that came from her lips, even when those words were poison dressed as honey. My name is Margaret, and at 73 years old, I had lived what I thought was a full life, filled with both joy and sorrow, having buried my beloved husband Richard 5 years ago, and spending my days in the small cottage we had built together, surrounded by memories and the occasional visit from my family. Rebecca was my only child, and after her father died, she became even more attentive, calling me every week, visiting twice a month, and always asking about my health, my finances, and whether I needed anything, which warmed this old heart of mine because I truly believed she cared. She had married a man named David who worked in real estate, and they had 2 children, my precious grandchildren, 7-year-old Tommy and 5-year-old Sarah. And whenever they visited my cottage, came alive with laughter and the patter of little feet racing through rooms that had grown too quiet. Tommy was special though, with those bright, curious eyes that seemed to see more than a child should. And he had formed an attachment to me that went beyond the usual grandparent-grandchild bond, often insisting on sleeping over at my cottage and spending hours listening to my stories about his grandfather and the old days. It was during one of these sleepovers 3 months ago that everything began to unravel, though I didn't know it at the time because I was too trusting, too naive to see the darkness growing in my own daughter's heart. Tommy had been unusually quiet that evening, picking at his dinner and watching me with those solemn eyes, until finally, when I tucked him into bed, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength and whispered in a trembling voice that he needed to tell me something important, something scary that he had heard. I smoothed his hair and smiled, reassuring him that he could tell Grandma anything, and what came out of his mouth made my blood run cold, because he said he had heard his mother on the phone talking about me, talking about money, talking about something called inheritance, and how she wouldn't have to wait much longer. Children mishear things, I told myself, trying to calm the sudden racing of my heart. But Tommy was insistent, his little face scrunched up with worry as he described hiding behind the couch while Rebecca spoke in hushed, angry tones to someone about my cottage, my savings, and how everything would be there soon, very soon, once the old lady was out of the way. I felt dizzy listening to him, felt the room spin, because surely my daughter couldn't mean what Tommy thought she meant, but the fear in his eyes was real, and children don't fabricate that kind of terror without reason. I thanked him for telling me, gave him extra kisses, and lay awake all night staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that there was a rational explanation, that Rebecca would never hurt me, that I was being paranoid in my old age. But something had shifted. Something had cracked in the foundation of my trust. The next morning, I acted normal, made pancakes for Tommy, and played games with him. But inside, I was already changing, already becoming watchful, already starting to see things I had missed before, like how Rebecca always steered conversations toward my will and my assets, how she had been encouraging me to sign papers without reading them carefully, how she had recently suggested I add her name to my bank accounts for convenience. 2 weeks after Tommy's revelation, I did something I had never done before, something that felt like a betrayal, but which I now know saved my life. Because I hired a private investigator named Mr. Chen, who came highly recommended, and told him I needed to know what my daughter was really doing when she wasn't visiting me. The cost was significant, eating into my modest savings, but the gnawing suspicion in my gut wouldn't let me rest, wouldn't let me dismiss Tommy's words as childish imagination. And Mr. Chen was thorough, professional, and mercifully discreet. While I waited for his findings, I began paying closer attention to Rebecca's visits, noting how she always brought tea in a thermos that she poured herself, how she insisted I drink every drop because it was a special blend, good for my bones and my heart. And wasn't it strange that after drinking her tea, I always felt drowsy, confused, sometimes losing hours without knowing where they went? I started pretending to drink, dumping the tea in my potted plants when she wasn't looking, and suddenly my mind felt clearer, sharper, more alert than it had been in months. And that's when the real terror set in, because I realized she had been drugging me, slowly poisoning me, or at least keeping me compliant and confused. Mr. Chen called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice grave as he asked to meet me somewhere private, somewhere Rebecca wouldn't see us. And we met at a small cafe 2 towns over, where he spread photographs and documents across the table between us with shaking hands. What I saw destroyed me, rebuilt me, and set me on a path of righteous fury, because there in black and white was evidence of Rebecca's affair with a man named Marcus, evidence of massive debts she and David had accumulated through gambling and bad investments, evidence of forged documents where she had already attempted to transfer ownership of my cottage, and evidence, most damning of all, of her searches on her computer about untraceable poisons and how to make an elderly person's death look natural. The photographs showed Rebecca meeting Marcus in hotels, entering his apartment at odd hours, and the timestamps proved this had been going on for over a year, right under David's nose, though Mr. Chen suspected David might be complicit because the financial records showed both their names on the gambling debts, which totaled over $300,000. They were desperate, drowning in debt, about to lose everything, and I was their life raft, their salvation, their ticket to financial freedom, because my cottage was worth $500,000, and my savings, though modest, would cover another $100,000. And to them, I was just an old woman in the way, an obstacle to be removed as quietly and quickly as possible. I sat in that cafe, feeling my heart shatter and reform into something harder, something colder, because the daughter I had raised, had nursed through fevers, had sacrificed for, had loved unconditionally, was planning to murder me. And that knowledge changed everything, changed me fundamentally. Mr. Chen asked what I wanted to do, suggested going to the police, but I knew the evidence, while damning, wasn't quite enough for an arrest, because Rebecca had been careful, had searched her computer using private browsers, had paid cash for her hotel meetings, and the forged documents could be explained away as misunderstandings, as me being senile and signing things I didn't remember. I needed more concrete proof, needed to catch her in the act, and more than that, I needed to protect my grandchildren, needed to make sure Tommy and Sarah didn't grow up with a murderer for a mother without being rescued from that poisonous household. I thanked Mr. Chen, paid him his fee plus a generous bonus, and asked him to continue monitoring Rebecca's activities while I formulated a plan. Because if she wanted to play games with life and death, then I would show her what an old woman with nothing left to lose could accomplish. That night, I called Rebecca, and in my best frail elderly voice, told her I hadn't been feeling well, had been having chest pains and shortness of breath, and could she come visit tomorrow to help me sort through some important papers, because I wanted to make sure everything was in order, just in case. I could hear the excitement in her voice, barely concealed, as she agreed, said she would come first thing in the morning and bring that special tea I loved so much. And my stomach turned, knowing what that tea contained, but I said, "Thank you, sweetheart, you're such a good daughter," and meant every word as bitter irony. Before she arrived, I contacted my lawyer, old Mr. Henderson, who had handled Richard's estate, and told him I needed to make some changes to my will immediately, that very morning, and he heard the urgency in my voice and agreed to come to my cottage at 8 a.m. sharp. I also set up hidden cameras that Mr. Chen had provided, small devices tucked into bookshelves and picture frames that would record everything. And finally, I called my dear friend Patricia, who lived next door, and asked her to come over at exactly 10 a.m., no matter what she heard or saw, to please come over and check on me. Everything was in place, and I felt calm, eerily calm, as I waited for Rebecca to arrive, knowing that today would determine everything, would expose the truth, and set in motion either my salvation or my doom. She came at 9:30, carrying that thermos of poisoned tea, and wearing a concerned expression that would have fooled me completely if I hadn't known better, hadn't seen the evidence of her betrayal. And she hugged me, said she had been so worried about me, and let's sit down and have some tea while we talk about those papers. Mr. Henderson had already left, having witnessed my new will, which cut Rebecca out entirely and left everything to Tommy and Sarah in a trust she couldn't touch. And I had signed a document detailing my suspicions about her poisoning me, which he promised to open if anything happened to me, giving him insurance and leverage. Now came the dangerous part, as Rebecca poured 2 cups of tea, and I had to pretend to drink mine, had to touch it to my lips while actually letting it spill down my chin, which I blamed on my trembling hands, my weakness, and she watched me like a hawk, watched to make sure I consumed enough, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She started talking about my assets, about how it would be so much easier if we consolidated everything, put it all in joint accounts, made her the beneficiary on my life insurance, and I nodded, played confused, played compliant, while the cameras recorded every word, every suggestion, every manipulation. Then Tommy burst through the door, unannounced, unexpected, because Rebecca had told him to stay home with David, but somehow he had convinced his father to drop him off early, and he ran to me, threw his arms around me, and knocked over my teacup, sending the poisoned liquid spilling across the floor. Rebecca's face transformed, fury flashing across her features before she caught herself, smoothed it away, and scolded Tommy for being clumsy. But I saw it, saw the mask slip, and knew that she had just revealed her true nature on camera. Tommy whispered in my ear, "Grandma, don't drink anything. Please don't go back home with her, please." And I held him tight, this brave little boy who had risked his mother's anger to save me. And I whispered back, "I won't, sweetheart. Grandma's safe now, I promise."
Rebecca tried to recover, tried to pour more tea, but I refused, said I was feeling too nauseous. And she pushed harder, insisted. And that's when Patricia knocked on the door right on time and entered with her spare key, calling out, "Margaret, are you all right? I heard raised voices." And Rebecca had no choice but to smile, to pretend everything was fine, while Patricia took in the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I asked Patricia to stay, asked her to help me rest, and Rebecca had to leave, had to abandon her mission for the day, but not before she leaned close and whispered, "We'll finish our talk tomorrow, Mother. You need to sign those papers. It's important." And I nodded meekly, while inside, I was already 3 steps ahead, already planning her downfall. That night, I didn't sleep, but I wasn't afraid anymore, because I had evidence, had witnesses, had changed my will. And most importantly, I had protection. But I needed one more piece, needed her to confess, needed her to reveal her full plan in her own words, where it couldn't be denied or explained away. I called David the next morning, asked to speak with him privately, and when he came to my cottage that afternoon without Rebecca, I showed him everything. The photographs of her affair, the evidence of the gambling debts, the forged documents, and the searches about poison. And I watched his face crumble, watched him realize that his wife had betrayed him too, had planned to use him and discard him once she had my money. He wept, broke down completely, because despite everything, he had loved her, had trusted her, and she had made him complicit in debts he didn't even know about, had ruined his credit, his reputation, his life. And I felt pity for him, but I also felt satisfaction, because now I had an ally, someone on the inside who could help me get the final confession I needed. David agreed to wear a wire to confront Rebecca that evening, to ask her directly about her plans for me and Mr. Chen. Set up the recording equipment while I waited at Patricia's house, surrounded by friends who had rallied around me once they knew the truth. The recording was damning, devastating, as David asked Rebecca what she had been doing to his mother-in-law. And Rebecca at first denied, but then as David pressed harder, revealed that she had been giving me sleeping pills, crushed into tea to keep me docile, to make me sign documents without fully understanding them. And yes, she admitted, when David accused her directly, she had been researching stronger methods because the old bat was taking too long to die naturally. And they needed that money, needed it desperately, before the creditors came after them, before Marcus grew impatient, before everything collapsed. She said other things too, terrible, cruel things, about how I had lived long enough, how I was a burden, how the cottage was wasted on someone who would be dead soon anyway. And listening to the recording later, I felt no sadness, only cold determination, because this woman was not my daughter anymore. If she ever had been, she was a stranger, a monster wearing my child's face. David took the recording to the police, along with all of Mr. Chen's evidence, and Rebecca was arrested the next morning, charged with attempted murder, fraud, and a dozen other crimes that would keep her locked away for years. And her face, when the officers handcuffed her, when she realized she had been caught, was a mixture of shock, rage, and disbelief that her foolproof plan had been unraveled by an old woman she had underestimated. The trial was swift, brutal, and very public because the media loved the story of a daughter trying to poison her mother for inheritance. And every detail came out: the affair, the debts, the poison, the forged documents, and the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. She received 15 years in prison, while David, who cooperated fully, received probation and lost custody of Tommy and Sarah, who came to live with me in my cottage, which suddenly felt full of life again, full of purpose, because these children needed stability, needed love, needed to know that not all adults would betray them. Marcus disappeared once the arrests happened, fled to avoid being charged as an accessory, and good riddance, because he was just another parasite, another user, and Rebecca's world had completely collapsed, just as she had planned mine to collapse. In the years since then, I have watched Tommy and Sarah heal, slowly, learning to trust again, learning to laugh without fear. And Tommy still has nightmares sometimes, still wakes up crying, but he knows he's safe, knows that his warning saved us both. And I tell him every day that he's my hero, my guardian angel. Rebecca writes letters from prison, letters full of apologies and excuses, claiming she wasn't in her right mind, claiming Marcus manipulated her, claiming she never would have gone through with it. But I burn those letters unread, because I have no daughter anymore. I have only my grandchildren and the life we're building together. The cottage has been refinanced, expanded to accommodate 3 people instead of 1, and I've started a small college fund for both children, using money I no longer have to worry about protecting from thieves and poisoners, and every morning I wake up grateful, not just to be alive, but to have discovered the truth in time, to have been saved by a 7-year-old boy's courage, and to have found strength I didn't know I possessed. People in town still whisper when I pass, some pitying, some admiring, and I hold my head high, because I survived, because I fought back, because when someone tries to destroy you, the best revenge is not just living, but thriving. And that's exactly what we're doing, Tommy, Sarah, and I, in our little cottage by the woods, where love finally means what it should mean: safety, protection, and an unbreakable bond forged not by blood, but by the choice to save each other, no matter the cost. Rebecca will be released eventually. We'll try to re-enter our lives. And when that day comes, I'll be ready, with legal protections, with restraining orders, with every safeguard money and law can provide. Because I learned the hardest way possible, that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it grows in your own home, wears your child's face, and calls you mother while plotting your death. And once you've looked that evil in the eye and defeated it, you're never naive again, never helpless again, never a victim again, only a survivor with scars that tell a story, and grandchildren who know that their grandmother loved them enough to become a warrior when warriors were needed most.